The US military says it has struck some 7,000 targets since the start of this war with Iran. But how do you find, identify and eliminate that many targets? And what role is artificial intelligence playing in that process?
The military call it the kill chain, the targeting sequence in which artificial intelligence is now deeply embedded. And we'll talk to someone who up until last year was on the inside advising the US military on precision warfare.
We'll look at the tension that is creating between the Pentagon and the companies that develop the artificial intelligence. Stay with us. This is the Security Brief. Mikey, walk us through the kill chain. How does it actually work and where does AI fit within it?
Yeah, so it is called the kill chain. It's quite a coarse term, but it's actually what's used in military parlance. And it's a term that is used to describe the entire targeting sequence. So from the first piece of intelligence that identifies a potential target to the moment the precision-guided munition hits, to then the assessment of how that munition has affected the target. That's called bomb damage assessment. The acronym that is used in military parlance is quite long, but if we use a graphic here to explain it, it's called F2T2EA, and hopefully it'll spell it out now. So find, fix, target, track, engage, assess. And the point today is that artificial intelligence is accelerating every stage of this process.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning of that sequence, finding the target. What intelligence is being fed into that find process?
Yeah, so we talk about this a lot on the security brief. There's three main key pieces of intelligence. The first one we talk about is human intelligence. And that's from assets or informants, potentially on the ground. Then there's imagery intelligence. This is the second key one, IMINT as we call it. And it's predominantly from drones, but it could be from GEOINT, from satellites as well. Let's take a look at an example of how the US would have been getting imagery intelligence over Iran. I've seen on open source intelligence networks video footage of this is the MQ-9 Reaper. This has been used pervasively over Iran. Now, it also transpires that open source intelligence is saying that 11 of these have actually been shot down. But there are more advanced drones, Christian, as well, like the stealth RQ-170s that we saw operating or coming back from operating over Venezuela during the Maduro operation.
And what about electronic intelligence?
Yeah, the third component, ELINT as it's called, and this is a critical subset. A critical subset of ELINT is what's called SIGINT, signals intelligence. And last week we focused on the RC-135. We can see it here now. It's basically the same airframe as the KC-135, those two that had the collision that we spoke about earlier on. It's a reconnaissance aircraft basically that was deployed to Al Udeid early on in the build-up, and it's basically there to intercept communications. So it's phone calls, radio traffic, command signals, etc.
Okay. So that's an awful lot of information coming from various different directions. And AI is playing a role in all of that.
Yeah, I mean, across all of those three, the data is significant. And this has always been one of the problems, is that the ability to collect the data has accelerated significantly, but when there's a human involved, the ability to analyze and process that data has always been the bottleneck. So now what AI is doing is it's automatically detecting and classifying military assets, it's labeling them, and we're talking about thousands of satellite passes, hundreds of hours of drone footage, intercepted communications, all of it arriving simultaneously. A human analyst might be able to process a handful of that information, but the collation of intelligence has, as I said, accelerated with drones. Mm-hmm. When the capability of drones came on the market, that just started to suck up way more intelligence, and the ability to analyze that didn't keep up. So now AI can cross-reference those millions of data points in literally seconds.
Right, so we know that Anthropic's Claude was embedded in the Pentagon systems and was used to great effect in the Maduro raid. But then just days before the war started, the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, ordered it to be stripped out. Do we know whether Claude is being used in Iran to identify and track those 7,000 targets?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, without a shadow of a doubt, the answer is almost yes. Trump signed the order to phase it out on the 28th, and then the bombs started falling the same day. And our colleagues at CBS, as we know, have confirmed that Claude was used in those initial strikes and is still being used. And the reason for that is simple. Claude is effectively the backbone of Palantir's Maven targeting system, the platform running inside the kill chain. You can't rip that out overnight. It's impossible. And right now, the Pentagon doesn't have a replacement or an alternative that can back it up.
Okay, so we've got this Palantir presentation of what Maven does and also how it orders the target list.
Yeah, so what we'll do now is we'll take a quick look of Palantir's own demonstration. But what I want you and what I want the viewer to watch is just how quickly it moves from that raw intelligence across the three components, human, IMIN, and ELINT, to then identify, we talk about this a lot, the COA, the course of action. This is the system that Claude has at its core.
As you can see, it's not just one data feed, it's multiple. And instead of having 8 or 9 systems for those decision makers to look at every single day in order for them to make decisions, you then fuse it into a single visualization tool. You have different types of targets that are identified on the left there. Every single column produces a different type of decision-making process. Once you have that decision and you're trying to actually action that process, we now move into COA generation, course of action generation, where we are automatically, via a number of factors, trying to identify what the best asset to prosecute a target looks like. Once we've got the different approaches and we select one, we then can move directly into how do we action that target. So we've gone from identifying the target to now coming up with a course of action to now actioning that target, all from one system. This is revolutionary. We were having this done in about 8 or 9 systems where humans were literally moving detections left and right in order to get to our desired end state, in this case, actually closing a kill chain.
Christian, I've got to say, having worked in this process over 20 years ago, to watch that on the screen and the level of technology that we're now looking at, I think I've probably got your attention now.
Well, I mean, that's an eye-opener, I think, for our audience, because that's targets on spreadsheets, multiple kill chains, operating all at once, simultaneously, to hit, as we've seen in this war, thousands of targets within the space of 3 weeks. That's incredible. It tells you, look, it's not the first AI war, but I think what is perhaps new, and that video there just gives us insight into it, is the speed with which it's being done. Let's go back for a second to the kill chain, F2T2EA. We've covered find, intelligence gathered, target identified. What comes next?
Yeah, the second part of that's called fix. It's where you pin the target down precisely, where it tells you something is there. Fix tells you exactly where it is, and in real time, and it gives you a really accurate GPS coordinate, accurate enough to guide a precision-guided munition onto it. What AI is doing is it's compressing what used to take hours of that cross-referencing into literally seconds.
And presumably that sort of precision matters, because the next stage is track, which presumably gets more complicated when and if a target moves.
Yeah, I mean, the relativity of a stationary target, it's quite straightforward. A bunker, a command facility, a missile battery, they're all kind of fixed positions. So this is an S-300 missile defense system, but you can see that it's wheeled. So it's mobile. Basically it's on transporter. And we can see some of the footage of Iranian mobile command centers being hit by the US and Israel. And then on the top of that, it's also can assist with the tracking of senior military commanders, high value targets, HVTs as we call them in the military. And they're traveling by road. In the military, we call this what's called a TST, a time-sensitive target. And what AI does is it doesn't just track the target, it predicts where it's actually going next in able to facilitate that strike.
Okay, so you've just explained the targeting stage, and this is where, of course, the process gets morally complex, because this is where the collateral damage assessment is made. And that's an important part of the equation. It has to be.
Yeah, this is what I would regard as the most consequential part of the entire chain. And to give you an example, the British military would always conduct collateral damage estimates called a CDE for any targeting operation. So what we do is, we'd look at AI maps of everything that is surrounding the area. That could be a hospital, a school, a religious site, residential buildings. And the AI will calculate what's called a likely blast radius using different weapon methodologies, and then the model would calculate probable casualties or collateral off the back of that. And in theory, that information should determine whether to strike the target and what weapon you're going to use to strike that target.
In theory?
Yeah, so in theory, so just because you have the ability and the means to strike a target, the senior commander must decide whether you should strike that target, and that's where rules of engagement.
And what about having eyes on the target? Because
Yeah.
this is all AI and it's all on a spreadsheet, as we've just seen. But what about the human connection with what the computer is doing?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we call it pattern of life, monitoring pattern of life, or POL, as it's known. And what you're doing effectively is you're monitoring the surroundings of a target over a period of time. That's why drones are so good for this, because they've got long lighter times. And what you're trying to do is identify any transitionary information that could lead to potential collateral.
In essence, really, the AI should cover up the human mistakes. It should be able to spot where there is a flaw in the system.
Yeah, so if your target has a school bus, for example, that comes by at 8 a.m. every morning, then through that POL and the AI should pick that up. Or if there are kids that go out and play football at certain times of day near the target, for example, that's what POL should pick up. There are other elements that complicate assessment for targeteers, and I spoke to a source that was a targeteer inside NATO, and he was telling me about a weapons malfunction, for example, or a secondary explosion, secondary effects as it's called, and that could be an improvised explosive device. Something that you might not know about, that you will be building a collateral damage estimate around that could impede the assessment of that CDE. So there is risk with collateral damage assessments.
Which brings us to the school in Minab province in Iran, the biggest civilian catastrophe of this war. 175 people killed that we know of, and most of them schoolgirls. What went wrong?
The investigation is ongoing, so we are hoping that will be transparent and that will come out in the course of time. But the Pentagon's own preliminary investigation concluded that the US was likely responsible. The strike was targeting a neighboring IRGC, naval base Iranian forces, but early indications are the coordinates used were out of date. This is an image from BBC's Verify, and you can see in the top right-hand corner of that image the proximity of the school to the base. This is a bomb damage assessment, so on that you can see buildings with visible impact and scorch marks. They're the sort of 5 circles running across the screen, and then you've got likely scorch marks, which comes from the collateral, and then the white square in the sort of top left of the image is buildings that were actually destroyed.
Right, but we know that by December 2025, 2 months before the war, the satellite imagery showed children playing in that courtyard.
Yeah, and I think this is where I hope the investigation will focus, and this is where the questions in hopefully hearings that will come subsequently will focus on. Again, the targeteer that I was speaking to today, he also offered a really interesting piece of information, and that within NATO's gold standard is that no imagery older than 90 days can be used inside the targeting process. Now, in that case, the school has clearly been there longer than 90 days, so the question is, was pattern of life being conducted?
Well, let's get a view on that. Wes Bryan spent years at the Pentagon in the Civilian Protection Center of Excellence. It's a department that was specifically designed to prevent what happened at the Minab school. Wes, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We've just taken our audience through the kill chain, so find, fix, track, target, engage, assess. In your experience, where does the human actually enter that AI loop in practice versus what the doctrine or where the doctrine says they should?
I can't say where they're entering now. In the last year, we've seen such a kind of a de-evolution in standards and practices in military use of force in some of these operations over the past year. But the human, I could say prior to that, and what the Pentagon and the entire DoD, the entire force were working on, primarily with the integration of, Project Maven, was that humans are in the loop, at every stage. We know at this point, to some degree, at least, that Project Maven and parallel programs are being used all the way in the the detection portion, finding a possible enemy target, locating that target if it's a person or structure or vehicle or equipment, what have you, tracking that target if it happens to be moving, even conducting targeting recommendations, weaponeering, for example, possibly incorporating what we have as our collateral damage analysis software, in parallel with these AI softwares. I'm not sure how far along at this point they are with that. I don't think very far along, frankly. So it's likely still two separate softwares being used along with others. And then and the human should be in the loop at every single point, checking at the very least right after the find. Here's a potential target. Here's a list of potential targets that a human team now needs to verify, whittle that down, and then go to fix and track from there. And AI can assist there.
Pete Hegseth, the Defense Sec, has ordered the stripping of Anthropic's Claude AI from Pentagon systems, yet we know from CBS reporting that Claude is still being used in the targeting sets that are being developed in Iran. So does the removal of that AI make the kill chain safer or more unsafe?
I'm glad you asked. It really depends on how the AI is being used. There are definite benefits to AI integration and targeting, and that's in data aggregation and refinement for human teams. It's also in flagging potential errors. I argue that had we had AI data sets and programming loaded in to flag for civilian populations, a pattern of life, no strike entities, a simply programmed AI system could have pointed out to the targeting team in the case of the Manop school strike that, hey, actually, this is listed as a school on Iranian websites. It's listed in Iranian Google map sources as a school. And also look at the imagery. Very easy to see that it's likely not a military compound with the sports and play areas and the blue and pink walls. And so AI could have easily caught what many humans should have caught all the way along the way in the targeting process here, if used properly.
Wes Bryant, thank you very much indeed for being on the programme. Fascinating stuff, Mikey. Let's pick up some of what Wes was talking about. We've been through now fix, track, target, engage. What we've not talked about a lot is assess. Why is that important?
Well, from a military standpoint, the assess part is called BDA, Bomb Damage Assessment. And it's crucially important because that type of video footage that we're seeing of explosions, it's probably coming from a form of tracking pod that sits under the centerline of the aircraft. It's got electro-optic capability, camera-wise, it's got forward-looking infrared. And the analysts will be poring over that. So
in real time?
In real time, yeah, exactly. So as the munition goes in, they'll be recording it. And what the analysts are looking for is, did the munition hit? Did it destroy the target? Collateral damage estimates. And AI analyzes battle damage assessment, as you say, in real time. And it feeds that assessment back into the system, into the target set, either closing the loop or maybe looking at a potential restrike.
Fascinating stuff, Mikey. Thank you very much. That's it for this week. Mikey has done quite a few of these videos on the Iran war, which are there on the YouTube website under the Security Brief catalogue. Do take a look at those. We'll have another episode for you, of course, very soon as we continue to track this conflict and the issues that it throws up. Thanks for watching this week. We'll see you next time.